Ann Wright is a 29-year U.S. Army Reserves veteran who retired as a colonel and a former U.S. diplomat who resigned in March 2003 in opposition to the war in Iraq. She served in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Mongolia. In December 2001, she was on the small team that reopened the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan. She's the co-author of the book Dissent, Voices of Conscience, and she recently wrote or republished a piece called Why Would Anyone Kill Oneself in an Attempt to Stop a War? So, Ann, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Katie. It's great to be back with you.
Thank you so much. I wanted to ask you, we are in the midst of a genocide against the people of Palestine, the people of Gaza in particular, but really all Palestinians. Also, it's the 2-year anniversary of the start of the proxy war in Ukraine. Want to ask you about both of those conflicts, proxy wars in some ways, but I wanted to start off by playing some footage of you and your comrades at Code Pink getting arrested back in November. Could you set up what you were interrupting and disrupting?
Well, yes, whenever any of the policymakers of our country go before the Congress to testify, that's the one chance we have to be in the same room with them, because we don't get invited to the White House. We don't get invited to anything really. So we kind of have to bust in on their parties. And the congressional hearings are open to the public. And if you get there early enough and get in line early enough, you can get in. Even though the cops, the Capitol Police know exactly who we are. In fact, they talk to us by name. Oh, hey, Ann, glad to see you back. And so we go in, and Medea for sure. Oh my God. And we sit there until we have something to say. And it's the only time that these leaders, this in particular, Tony Blinken and Lloyd Austin, Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense, were sitting there. And I don't think they had heard voices like this really in person. So it was important to stand up and to, in a quick message, tell them what we felt that on behalf of the American public. We're here in the rotunda of the Russell Senate office building, and we've just walked in and seen all of these photographs and posters of people that have been kidnapped, taken hostage, lost. 240 people taken hostage. None of us condone the hostage taking nor the deaths of 1,200 people on October 7th, but what we also need to be having here are the pictures of some of the 15,000 Palestinians who have been killed in Gaza and some of the thousands of prisoners that are in Israeli jails from the West Bank and East Jerusalem without trial, going to a military court. So it's a poignant reminder. These are a reminder of a terrible thing that happened on October 7th, and we need to be reminded of what goes on in the West Bank and East Jerusalem and Gaza every single day at the hands of the Israeli government that is killing and war criming people of Palestine.
And here's the actual disruption. That was your preface.
Ceasefire now! Save the children of Gaza! Save the children of Gaza! Ceasefire now! Where is your pride, America?
That was David Barrows.
Nice that people feel very passionately, but I ask that we have order in this hearing room and respect our speakers. We will move forward with the hearing and allow the people here and the American people to hear from their witnesses.
3,500 kids dead. Come on, I'm an Army colonel. I'm a former diplomat. I resigned on that war in Iraq that you talked about. That was a terrible thing, and what we're doing right now in supporting Israel's genocide of Gaza is a terrible thing, too.
Thank you, Secretary Blinken. If you can continue, please.
Thank you, Chair. The President's funding request has 4 key elements.
So thank you, Ann, for doing that. And tell us why you were doing that.
Well, Tony Blinken was testifying before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and had done nothing other than just say, that Israel was acting in self-defense. And at that time, here it was the end of October, and there had already been an early part of November, there had already been at least 10,000 uh, Palestinians that have been killed in Gaza. The horrific bombing of Gaza was like nothing we really have ever seen before. And it just continued now for another 2 months. So now that we have nearly 30,000 Palestinians killed and 7,000 that have never been found under the rubble, it's so important that anytime we see any of these politicians and government officials, that we really give them an earful because this is U.S. complicity in genocide in Gaza. So it's up to us to make sure that they realize that they are war criminals, just like the Israeli government officials are.
Now, you're someone who has been paying attention to Israel for a while, and you were part of a flotilla.
Well, I started in 2009 going to Gaza after the Israeli attack that killed 1,400 people in 27 days. Uh, that was 2009. In 2010, I was asked to be on the Gaza flotilla, where the Marvi Marmara, the big ship from Turkey, where Israeli commandos came onto the ship, murdered 10 people, wounded 50 others. I was not on that ship, but I was on a little boat right next to it. All 7 of the boats of that flotilla were boarded by Israeli commandos, and people beaten up on all of the ships, and all of us were taken to Israeli prison and subsequently deported from Israel. I also have been on other flotillas and have been back in Israeli prison several different times on these flotillas. It's a way that we can bring attention, international attention, to the continuing siege, naval siege, as well as land siege that's going on Gaza.
And you were a colonel, you were also a diplomat. Why does the United States support Israel unconditionally? What does the United States get out of it?
Well, it's been the policy virtually since the creation of the state of Israel that the U.S. has protected the governments of Israel, no matter what acts they commit toward Palestinians or toward other people. And I think it's a holdover from uh, guilt about the genocide, the Holocaust from World War II. But we find that there are so many U.S. politicians that are elected to senior levels of the government, like all of the presidents, seem to be very strong supporters of the state of Israel because they get money from APAC, the American Israeli Public Affairs Council, and from very rich Zionists who support the state of Israel no matter what actions it takes against Palestinians.
Right. And then, of course, you have the Christian Zionists who are on the other, uh, for very different ideological reasons, but who are
Yeah,
unconditionally supportive of Israel.
indeed, and they are very strong supporters. And when we probably get yelled at as much by them as we get yelled at by the Zionists when we're out on the streets trying to challenge the U.S. policies on Israel.
Right. And what is America motivated by when it comes to the Ukraine proxy war?
Well, it seems to be motivated by the opportunity to try to, interestingly, try to take down the Russian government. And one would say, well, why in the world do you want to take down the government of a huge country like that? I mean, shouldn't you be working diplomatically? It's not like, that you agree with all the policies of every country in the world, but you don't try to take down their governments, except that seems to be a role the U.S. thinks it should play. If you count up the number of coups that have been assisted by the United States, it's a pretty darn long list. And I think this is kind of a throwback to the Russians going into Afghanistan back in the late 1970s, where Brzezinski said, "We will really put we will make Russia pay for that. We will really make them have to ramp up their military for what they're doing." I think that's exactly what they're trying to do here, and have done it. I think they've been surprised at the Russian response, and that it continues to be a very strong one. And I think they are surprised that members of the U.S. Congress, not many, but a few, are still saying maybe it's We've already spent nearly $100 billion in support of the Ukrainian government. Isn't it time that peace talks, negotiations start there to stop the killing, number one? And number two is this huge expenditure on war, where every country that's contributing to the war effort, so to speak, the military equipment that's going into Ukraine, they all have social issues that money could be well spent. And certainly we in the United States have plenty of social issues we should be addressing rather than funding another proxy war.
It's obvious that the United States wants to weaken and bleed Russia. It's obvious that Israel and the United States wants to bleed Palestinians. But in the course of bleeding Russians, they're of course killing Ukrainians, using Ukrainians as cannon fodder, and Israel, in the course of killing Palestinians, when they could be negotiating to release the hostages, instead of doing that, they're bombing, they're killing their own hostages. So it's not even about, it's not even their alleged moral commitment is undermined. This isn't about saving the lives of Ukrainians, and it's not about saving the lives of Israeli Jews.
The whole issue of countries calling themselves the most moral, whatever it is, the more they talk about morality, probably the less moral they really are. Israel has always claimed they have the most moral military in the world. Well, look what they're doing to the Palestinians. And certainly the United States prides itself on being a very moral country until you get in the history of how immoral our actions to other countries are and the numbers of people that we have killed in the name of U.S. values.
Did you have an aha moment that changed the way you saw the United States, or was it more gradual?
Well, I had worked in the U.S. government most of my adult life. I worked under 8 different presidential administrations, starting with JFK during the Vietnam War, and it wasn't like I agreed with all the policies that these various administrations cooked up. But like most people that stay in the government, you hold your nose to a lot of stuff and you find the policies and programs that you feel like you can work with that that you personally don't feel like you're doing anything to harm other people when the overall program that the US may be having in certain parts of the world certainly is harming a lot of people. But finally, it was the decision of the Bush administration to invade and occupy oil-rich Arab Muslim country Iraq that had nothing to do with 9/11, and it was like, for God's sakes, this is just one step too far for me. I'd held my nose to a lot of different things the U.S. had done in those 35 years, but this one, it was like, I'm not doing that anymore. So I was one of 3 U.S. diplomats that resigned over the U.S. war